In the name of God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, learning goes in stages. I've learned a number of things this week. We've been exercising an abundance of caution around COVID-19, as we do as a congregation. Of course, we stay separated as much as we can. We can't even sing at the moment, but we still gather. So we are exercising an abundance of caution. And one of the abundances of caution that I have exercised since March last year is I haven't been to the barber. I've been doing it myself. Well, I thought, seeing I've saved all this money not going to the barber, I would invest in some new hair clippers. I was using these old ones that was blunt and starting to tear a bit, and so I got this wonderful new package of clippers, and it had all these little combs that you fit on the thing. Well, I realised yesterday afternoon that these combs have numbers. And I should have used a number 4. And I used a number 1. So learning goes in stages, as do the combs that attach to my very new hair clippers. It'll grow back on the top. Well, in Jesus' day, learning went in stages as well. When you were about 6 years old, and we've got some kids getting ready to go back to school this coming week, when you were about 6 years old, as a young child in first century Palestine, you entered what was called Bet Sefer. And we learnt last week that Bet, or Beth in Hebrew, means house. Bethlehem, house of bread. Bet Sefer means house of the book. So when you're about 6, you toddled off to the teacher of the village, the local rabbi, and you began to learn. You took the first stage or the first step in your learning journey. And the rabbi would smear your slate. Some of you might even be old enough to remember using slates in the school. He would smear your slate with honey. And he would get the young student to wipe their finger across the slate and to taste the honey. And he would say, "May the words of God be like honey on your tongue." And the young student would begin to learn the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And learning those books off by heart. Can you imagine learning each of those books off by heart? Young people these days can still do that, only they do it with their favourite movies and their favourite songs. My granddaughter knows every word of Frozen, all the songs, all the narrative. So we can still do that, although we do it in different ways. By about the age of 10, so between 6 and 10, it took about 4 years to memorise the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures. Now that was where most education ended. People knew the narrative, they knew the Torah, they knew the stories. But for the best students, they would enter the next stage, the next step along the journey. It was called Bet Talmud. It was called the House of Learning. The House of Learning. And in Bet Talmud, from the age of about 10 to 14, young children would learn the rest of what we call the Hebrew Scriptures, the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and the Psalms. And by about the age of 14, they could recite pretty much all we know of the Hebrew Scriptures of the Old Testament. There's a wonderful story in Luke where Jesus' parents lose him and they find him in the temple, and we're told that the teachers in the temple were amazed at his questions. He is in Bet Talmud by that stage. He's about 12, we are told, and he knows the Torah and the prophets and the Psalms. Now, in Western education, of course, we do questions and answers, don't we? A teacher will ask a question, and the student is supposed to give an answer to that question. But in Hebrew educational process, the asker of the question isn't after an answer. The asker of the question is after a better question. And so that's why Jesus said they were amazed at his questioning, because they were asking a question and he was asking a better question. So in that educational process, in our educational process, the teacher will say, "What's 2 and 2?" And everyone will say, 4. And they go, "Yeah, you're right. That's the answer to the question." In a Hebrew school, they'll say, "What's 2 plus 2?" And the students will say, "What's 16 divided by 4?" It's another question. But it's a question that demonstrates you understand the question. But it's not just you understand the answer, but you understand much more than the answer. So the rabbi would give a text, and the response to that was another text. But what they also knew was the rabbi, when he said that particular text, he didn't mean that one, he meant the verse before or after it. And so when they responded not to the verse the rabbi had said, but to one of the verses before or after it. And this would go on for hours. This is what Jesus is doing at 12 years old in the temple. Now, by the time you got to about 14 years old, you would take on the yoke of your rabbi. There are very, this doesn't happen in the Christian church, doesn't it? Everybody agrees about everything. There are no different interpretations or anything. But in the Jewish tradition, rabbis differ and they argue and they talk, and if you follow a particular rabbi, you take on the yoke of that rabbi and the interpretation that rabbi has. Now we get to about 14. Most students were told, "Go and ply your trade." In other words, Rabbi was saying, "Okay, you've done really well, but you've learned about as much as you can. You probably need now to go back to your parents' house and your father's trade, and if he's a fisherman, then go and be a fisherman." But the very top students, the PhD potentials, if you like, was sent to a more important, a more famous kind of rabbi to learn more. And they entered the house of Midrash, the house of interpretation. And they, of course, then became the rabbis. They were the best of the best. They were the Harvard and the Princeton PhDs and the Cambridge and Oxford graduates. Now, as far as we know, that system worked by people referring, a junior rabbi, if you like, referring to a more important rabbi. There are only 2 rabbis that we know of, at least, that went around looking for their disciples. One was Rabbi Hillel, who we've talked a little bit about in past times. And the other one was Rabbi Yeshua bar Yosef. Jesus went from place to place, going up to people and saying, "Lech hakari, come, follow me." Now, Peter and Andrew and James and John are fishermen. They are on the Lake of Galilee repairing their nets. They have got to 14 odd years old, and the rabbi has said to them, Go ply your trade. You're not going to make it, fellas. You've gone as far as you're going to go. And they've gone back to their father, who were fishermen, and they have learnt their trade. We wonder why James and John and Andrew and Peter immediately leave their nets and follow Jesus. Because they have been afforded the greatest possible honour in their culture. This rabbi has come along and said, Lek hakari, come follow me. They've been told, you're not going to make it, you're not good enough, go and ply your trade. And all of a sudden, this rabbi comes along and says, yes, you are good enough. Come, follow me. And they leave their nets immediately and go and follow him. Now, if you can imagine Zebedee, the father of James and John, the next day in the village, he's going to be walking down the road and he's going to be saying, my boys aren't with me today. Look, my boys, and the question was supposed to be asked was, where are your boys, Zebedee? Where are your boys? And he would be puffed up with pride and he'd be able to say, a rabbi came and asked them to follow him. The greatest honour possibly could be bestowed on these boys. That's why immediately they leave their nets and follow him. Because to follow a rabbi is to do what the rabbi does. It's a story of Jesus walking towards the boat on the lake in the storm. And he says to Peter, come. Peter jumps out of the boat because that's what his rabbi is doing. It makes perfect sense to Peter to do that because you do what your rabbi does. So why am I telling you all this? Because Jesus is there to proclaim the kingdom. We are told that at the beginning of the text. He's proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. Not only in words, but in actions, and by calling these disciples, who are not the A team. These guys are the B team. They've only got so far. But by calling them, he is demonstrating exactly what the kingdom's about. It's not something of exclusiveness. It's not just for the elite. It's for everybody. Yes, it's for the A team. We need the A team. We need the Oxford and Cambridge, and we need scientists and theologians and lecturers and all those wonderful people. They're part of the kingdom. But they're not all of the kingdom. Because all of the kingdom is something that is inclusive. And by calling Peter and James and John and Andrew, Jesus is demonstrating in action what the kingdom is about. It's about inclusivity of everyone. Everyone has a seat at the table. Everyone has a ministry. Everyone is called. Back when I was about 14, I went to the careers advisor at school. And he basically said, go ply your trade. Yeah, you're never going to make it as an academic. You're probably not going to get to year 12. Go ply your trade. So that's exactly what I did. I went and learnt my father's trade as a butcher. And then at some stage in that journey, I heard the words, Lek hak ari. Come, follow me. And at some stage, in some way, you may not even be conscious of it, but you have heard those words. Come, follow me. If you hadn't heard those words, you'd be in a coffee shop right now, sitting, looking at the beach, or at sport, or doing something else. And this come follow me isn't an invitation to join a club, to join a church, to join any particular religion, to join any particular sect of any religion. That's not what it is. Come follow me is to be part of the kingdom that is bigger than any religion, bigger than any church. Lek hakari, come, follow me. That's why you're here this morning. Because you have heard deep in your hearts in words that you probably don't even understand. Lek hakari, come, follow me. And because we answered that call, this week, millions of people have heard the gospel of inclusivity. Millions of people have heard us say homophobia is not okay. And it's not okay to honour homophobia, because we answered that call to be a community that does what our rabbi does. Jesus practiced radical inclusivity, radical table fellowship. Everyone was welcome because the kingdom is all-embracing. We are here today because somewhere deep in our hearts we have heard that call, not to church, but to the kingdom. And the question we all must ask is, what does that mean for me? Lek hak ari, come, follow Jesus. The Lord be with you.